We are now a little bit more than a week into the Biden administration's handling of the crisis in Afghanistan. And while there has been success over the past few days in evacuating more people on a daily basis, we still don't know much about long-term what the Biden administration plans to do with so many of those who will be left vulnerable under the new Taliban leadership. So we're very lucky to be joined for a discussion about this topic by an organizer for Afghans for a Better Tomorrow, Arash Azizzada. Welcome to the Damage Report.
Hey, thank you for having me on today.
Very glad to have you on. So this is the first that we've spoken about this. As I said, it's been a week. First, your impressions of the handling of the situation. It's evolved over the last week, but what do you make of the way that the Biden administration has handled all this?
Well, I wish I could come here today and say that the withdrawal has gone well and that it's been perfectly executed. I think anybody that's been paying attention in the past few days can kind of notice that it's not been executed well, and rather disastrously for the Afghan people and the people on the ground there. It's been quite unfortunate. I have friends and family myself who are trying to escape and kind of find their way to refuge. They're trying to make it through the airport. I have friends who are trying to get family and friends out, and everybody is kind of failing in this very moment. And that puts us in a very dangerous and precarious situation. And some of our advocacy in these past few days has been to call on the Biden administration to actually do the right thing. We're now looking back at 20 years of failed occupation, failed withdrawal. But in these last few days, we asked that the US guarantee the facilitation and evacuation and essentially rescue all vulnerable Afghans who seek refuge, who seek safety and human dignity. And we're calling on the US to take in as many Afghan refugees as it can.
Okay, so I've heard representatives of the Biden administration talk about we're spooling up our ability to get people out. We think we're going to be able to get out these vulnerable Afghans. I often feel like, and I mentioned this on the show today, they say vulnerable Afghans. They mean vulnerable Afghans who directly worked with our occupation. Maybe they don't mean all those who will now be vulnerable, which is clearly a much larger group. So I know groups like yours are pushing them to have a wider definition of those who should receive aid and resettling. As of right now, based on what you've seen, what do you think the likelihood are that he'll be willing to do that? How wide do you think they're going to draw those lines?
Well, I would say first of all that there are roughly 38 to 40 million vulnerable Afghans. There's a story I heard the other day from a friend of mine whose family was threatened and targeted by the Taliban. Why? Because at some point, this restaurant happened to have served either US soldiers or NATO soldiers. So quite literally, pretty much every person that has in some capacity been alive in Afghanistan and interacted with the occupation or coalition forces is at risk. And obviously, we've been disappointed with what the Biden administration has said so far in the commitment that it has made. And we are continuing to call, and we are actually hopeful that the Biden administration will do the right thing. This is the platform it was also elected on. One of the things it mentioned during the 2020 campaign is that the Muslim ban should be overturned. Well, in this really critical moment, when Afghan people find themselves on the brink, if not entering quite literally a humanitarian disaster. If at this point the Biden administration cannot fulfill its promise to open its door to Afghan refugees and in essence overturn the Muslim ban and also do what the US has done in the past, but it has done so for Cuban refugees during the Johnson administration. It has done this for Vietnamese refugees after the Vietnam War under the Ford administration. And it also has done this during the Clinton administration in 1996 when it rescued Kurds from Kurdistan. And so there's precedent for this. And we're hoping that the Biden administration looks at the history and tries to leave behind a legacy that is positive and constructive to the Afghan people.
I'm so thankful that you sketched out the history of instances like this. It's totally true, and very few of the people, especially the people who are against refugees, don't even acknowledge that the US has done that in the past. I believe, if I remember correctly, it came out sometime in the last week. Joe Biden's previous comments back decades ago as a senator about, I think it was Vietnamese refugees following the war, and he wasn't really feeling like we had much of an obligation to help people. So that's not good, obviously. I am worried about what I've heard from him. But I want to switch things up briefly. So in the wake of the chaos a week ago, the Taliban put out statements implying that they're going to be different in some way without really much specifics. And since then, I've seen news of female anchors being taken off the air, of Afghans being beaten for wearing jeans and things like that. In terms of whether they have changed, I'm sure you're seeing and hearing a lot of things that I'm not familiar with. Well, what do you make of those claims?
Well, the Taliban is kind of reminding me of that abusive ex-boyfriend who stays in the picture and says, "Hey, this time I've changed." Well, I can tell you based on the stories that I'm hearing from dozens and dozens of folks on the ground, and what my fellow organizers, our fellow community members are hearing from their families, that is absolutely not true. They have not changed. They're probably doing a better job of showing the world through the international media at their press conference this like new reformed image of themselves. But women are still being killed for not cooking for Taliban soldiers. They're targeting Shia and Hazara minorities in Afghanistan, marking their home essentially and taking down where they live. And this the Taliban is known to have targeted and committed genocide against them in the past, specifically in 1998 in Mazar Sharif. And there's like just plenty of incidents that we've been hearing from folks on the ground that show to us that, and especially also I think what folks should note is that the international media is slowly leaving and they're in Kabul. But it's a big country. It's the size of Texas. There's a roughly 4 to 6 million people in Kabul, but it's a country of 38 million. So there's plenty of country or like lack of media coverage in the rest of the country that's not really conveying the repressiveness of the Taliban that they're kind of trying to cloak in this reformed image.
That's a great point. And even to the extent that there's media in Kabul, I expect that's going to change, and the U.S. we're going to pay attention to it now. But how much is CNN going to be talking about it in 3 months? To the extent that there hasn't been, at least in the capital, widespread violence from the Taliban, what do you think the chances are that they're sort of biding their time and expecting that once the international community is paying less attention, maybe they're freer to do what they might otherwise want to do?
Listen, I'm a community organizer in the Afghan diaspora. This is the most attention we've gotten in the 33 years I've been alive, or at least in the past 20 years that I've lived in the United States. I think they're biding their time. They're being strategic on their end and kind of waiting for the world attention to subside. And I think it's upon us, us in here in the diaspora and the media as well, to continue to shine a spotlight on Afghanistan, to not stop caring when there's folks not outside the airport. It's a big country. And I would also say that while violence is not occurring in a way that it was a few weeks before, violence is happening through other means. There's a run on the banks. There's no cash available for folks. Food availability probably is lasting folks another week. There's a drought. There's a pandemic. There's a humanitarian disaster that is large, that is in the making. And if folks want to prevent from the refugee crisis from worsening, which it already is bad, the migration flows will occur. If they want to prevent that, the world needs to step up, the United States, European Union, and international community, and they can ensure that humanitarian aid in an emergency package of some sort gets to the Afghan people.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that people that are trying to get out now. I worry that the US's willingness to participate in that process the clock's already ticking on that. Fast forward like a few months from now, the Taliban, a spokesperson mentioned earlier today, they don't want the US to encourage Afghans to leave, and they don't want Afghans to leave. Are you worried that like once this deadline is done with whatever's left of the deal they have with the US, like how difficult is it going to be for the people to get out once the US isn't involved in that process?
I think we're deeply worried, we're deeply concerned. And we're stressed out, quite frankly, about this arbitrary deadline that the Biden administration has now put. It says it's now in violation of the accord that it had with the Taliban. Well, the Taliban has been in violation of the human rights, as well as been committing war crimes and targeting ethnic and religious minorities. I would say that the United States, after 20 years, extending it by a few weeks to allow for the evacuation and rescue of vulnerable folks whose lives are going to be threatened, or folks who want to leave and start a new life, who deserve human dignity, who deserve safety, who deserve refuge. I think extending it by a few weeks, and I say that as an organizer who spent the last few years arguing for the occupation to end, for the US to end its military involvement. But right now, it can play a constructive role by keeping the airport secure, to continuously engage and put up some kind of perimeter that is safe and secure, so that folks that do want to get out, are rescued, and are allowed to come to the United States and given some kind of humanitarian parole and asylum in the US and elsewhere.
I hope so. If someone is watching this and they want to help in some way, what's the most productive thing that you as an organizer would advise them to do?
I would say if you have 5 minutes today, call your congressman. You can go to our website, weareafghans.org. We have a congressional call script. We have also a petition that has 100,000 signatures now. We ask people to sign that. But call your congressperson and say, hey, you can be constructive. The United States can play a positive role. Afghan lives are currently at risk, and the US can currently help save that. And if you want to talk to your congressman and encourage your friends to do that as well, your family, we'd be very grateful.
For more political news, breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.